Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week I predicted the number 1 would be Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, number 2 would be Killers of the Flower Moon, number 3 would be The Exorcist Believer, number 4 would be Paw Patrol, the Mighty Movie, and number 5 would be Socks. And unfortunately, I got so close, and last week was a pretty simple one to get all 5 right, and a bunch of us got it, and, it was all happy and well done. Once again, we're back to the losing streak of no one getting their predictions right, and of course, obnoxiously of it all, we mostly all would have gotten our predictions right again if it wasn't for one re-release that I didn't think was actually going to make a big enough weight, like Hocus Pocus, for example, like a couple weeks ago, that was like number 10 from what I remember. This one came out of nowhere, so let's go over what happened in the overall top 10, though. Number 1 was, of course, Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. Once again, though, we all kind of guessed right on that one. If you remember last weekend, it broke a ton of records. It opened really high, the highest it ever for a concert film in the 90 mils. It had about a 66% drop from this weekend from the last one, so it made 31 million this weekend domestically, which now adds to a domestic total of $129 million. So I'm sure some people will look at the drop off and be like, see, the first weekend was going to be front loaded. There you go. It's not like this is going to have much staying power. But I would argue it doesn't really matter when you open that big. The budget is 10 to 20 million, and they're still making a pretty sizable amount of money in the second weekend. And then also, last weekend we didn't have a worldwide total. We didn't have one by the time I was recording the video. This weekend we do. It is up to 160 million. So you have the already, incredible domestic run for a concert film, but now you have the worldwide numbers where it's like, oh, it's nearing 200 million worldwide on a 10 to 20 million dollar budget, which is insane for one of these movies because they don't usually do this well. Kind of speaks to the whole kind of phenomenon that Taylor Swift is. Like, this is unlike anything that we've kind of gotten in a long time, at least, and I figured, now that this is such a, big, juggernaut for the year, let's look at, how it's sizing up with other, runs for 2023. Right now, it has actually outgrossed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem domestically by 11 million, and it's 16 million behind, outgrossing the entire run of Fast X, which is kind of impressive to say the least. I think it's another thing to also speak to those movies where Fast and the Furious usually would make a ton more, and Taylor Swift probably wouldn't usually catch up so quickly. Usually, those movies would at least get into like 200, maybe 300 mil for the entire domestic run, but this one's kind of like, this one was kind of a disappointment. It just barely doubled its budget, but it was so big. It's like, is this thing even like profitable? The question of the franchise and how much money they can keep milking off of this thing is kind of in question right now, So the fact that this movie is catching up to it, of course, take that with a grain of salt, because normally, Fast X would make a lot more, and maybe normally a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles would make a little bit more if it wasn't impacted by some, SAG striking, writers striking, all that stuff. But still, it kind of just goes to show how much theaters needed the business that Taylor Swift was giving them. Worldwide, as I said, it is at 160 million, and it outgrossed the entire worldwide run of Evil Dead Rise by 14 million, and it is behind Scream 6 by 8 million. So for the year of 2023, it is continuing to rise. It still hasn't topped like any like top 10 or top 5, but it's getting pretty damn close, and it'll be interesting to see how it holds over. Obviously, I'm expecting another bit of a drop next weekend. Like I said, the 60% kind of went, that was kind of expected. I kind of expected like the opening weekend to be front loaded with a bunch of Taylor Swift fans. But it'll be interesting to see how it'll do next week, because I think it'll have another decent drop. Like, I don't think it's going to be number 1 again, but I don't think it'll be like, oh, now it's just like in the bottom 10 or whatever the fuck, I don't think that's going to happen. Let's move on to number 2 though, which is Killers of the Flower Moon, the latest film from Martin Scorsese, a co-production between Apple TV Plus Studios, or Apple Studios, whatever the fuck they call it, and Paramount Pictures. So this $200 million price tag that this film has, who knows who's sharing what amount of that, how much money that actually needs, especially since Apple doesn't really care about how much money they're spending. They care about how many people are going to view it on their streaming service. So maybe Paramount handles the distribution side of the budget, and then how much money, who knows? I think we're kind of at a point though, especially in the case of like Martin Scorsese, he probably doesn't care how commercial his movies, he doesn't really care about like the commercial success of his movies, because he just likes to make movies. He likes to tell stories. He's an artist, And so keep all of this with a grain of salt, because I'm sure you're going to hear the 200 million price tag and see how much it made and be like, oh, there you go, Scorsese bombing. This is on Marvel, but he can't make a commercial hit. I think he doesn't give a shit. I don't think he gives a single fuck about that, and that makes him superior in every way. Anyways, it made $23 million this weekend, though, which for a Martin Scorsese film, if you want to compare some recent examples, it's only $5 million above the opening weekend of The Wolf of Wall Street. And of course, a lot of these Scorsese movies, they open kind of like in limited theaters first, and they expand. Some of them get caught up in an award season, blah, blah, blah. But either way, it had an opening weekend technically a little higher than The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013. And it's only $3 million away from the opening weekend that The Departed had, and $18 million off from Shutter Island, which are some of his biggest commercially successful films out of a lot of them. So this movie's kind of right on par with them. In fact, worldwide, it's sitting at $44 million. That is Scorsese's second biggest opening in the worldwide market in his entire career. So it kind of just goes to show you, like, even though it may not be matching the numbers of the production budget of $200 million, like I said, the stipulations of who knows how much money they actually need and who knows how much Apple cares, because they probably think they'll make a lot back with the streaming stuff, and this will be a big awards contender. So, all the other stipulations, does it even really matter at this point? It'll probably get re-released for the award season, so it may make more money. Maybe word of mouth will be strong enough to keep this going. It has an A- cinema score, so that's pretty great for a nearly 3.5-hour movie that is so kind of grim and kind of heavy. The topics in that movie are pretty heavy to handle. Fantastic movie, though, that everyone should see. It'll be interesting because next week is kind of like the closest we are to Halloween, and FNAF is out, and another movie we'll talk about in the predictions. But with FNAF kind of being like the only big one, and that other one that we'll talk about, I am curious to see how it kind of performed. Not necessarily next weekend, because I think maybe it'll dip, but I continuing on after that, I think maybe it could potentially have a solid hold, or at least in a perfect world it would, and it will make a decent run at the box office. It's going to be interesting to see, but like I said at the start, Scorsese probably doesn't give a shit about how commercial his films are at this point, especially at this point in his career and in his life. So I think I should honor that and, kind of preface all of this other information with, yeah, he probably doesn't care. But that's the thing, though, is that like I kind of said, like, it's doing pretty well. It's kind of on par with some of his, biggest successes. Like I mentioned, The Departed and Shutter Island and Wolf of Wall Street. As far as like what it's outgrossed so far in the Scorsese filmography for the domestic runs, it's outgrossed quite a couple, because a lot of them don't really go over like 20 million domestic run. There's a lot that it's already outgrossed. And for example, it is only a couple 100,000 over the entire domestic run of Raging Bull. And of course there's, adjusting for inflation, times change, blah, blah, blah. But I think that goes to show you, either way you look at it, like, this movie is doing pretty solidly. It's only $5 million off from outgrossing Taxi Driver as well. And then when you look at the worldwide numbers, it is already outgrossed Age of Innocence by 12 million, and it's only 3 million away from, drumroll please, Goodfellas, which is, in some people's opinion, the best Scorsese movie. Like, that's the iconic film, maybe some of their favorite films ever. One of them is Goodfellas, It's almost outgrossed that entire worldwide run. So I think this movie will do pretty well for Scorsese's personal filmography, and I think in the long run, this will be a movie that is talked about and remembered and will be more culturally relevant, and nobody will give a shit about how well it did at the box office. But even then, with all these stipulations, it's doing pretty damn good. Hopefully some of this made sense. Let's move on to number 3, which is The Exorcist Believer, making $5 million, adding to a domestic total of $54 million, still $176 million off from the original film. Worldwide, it is sitting at $107 million, which is $321 million off from the original film's worldwide run in this instance. And I know I gave Killers of the Flower Moon a lot of stipulations, a lot of, a benefit of the doubt, and all these other things that I think it proves it doesn't really matter how much it makes if it doesn't, if it's not the highest grossing film of the year, blah, blah, blah. But in the case of The Exorcist Believer, total opposite. This is a movie that is kind of designed to be commercial. It was acquired by Blumhouse so they could be a commercial success. They had that in mind. So the fact that this movie, though for the singular film, it has tripled its $30 million budget, it's now $17 million over that. They're on their way to quadruple it, potentially. The fact that they spent $400 million for the overall rights of this thing, and this thing isn't like the biggest hit that they could have possibly anticipated, similar to what they did with Halloween in 2018, which I think, the first Halloween in that case was like the highest grossing one out of the other two that came out. But the fact that they can't recapture that success, I think, that is a good cause to make fun of this as far as like how it's doing. Like, yeah, what were you thinking? Anyways, let's move on to number 4, which is Paw Patrol the Mighty Movie, making $4.4 million, adding to a domestic total of $56 million. Worldwide, it is sitting at $132 million. So last week I talked about how it was able to outgross the first film's domestic run. Worldwide, it is still $19 million off from there. So maybe when we get around to like some weekends in November, we'll see it pass it. I don't think next weekend it'll be immediate, but maybe some weekends after that, which will, that'll push them over. Which, I mean, they've already tripled and quadrupled this $30 million budget, so they're good. They don't have to worry. Like Exorcist Believer, Nickelodeon didn't pay $400 million to get the rights of Paw Patrol. They already have it, Sorry, I just like making fun of Blumhouse sometimes. Let's move on to number 5, which was the big surprise, the one that upended everything. The Nightmare Before Christmas re-release. Who knew? It made $4.1 million this weekend, which adds to a domestic total. And of course, this is in combination with what it made when it originally came out and other re-releases it had. It's now sitting at a total of $77 million. Worldwide, sitting at $95 million. So $5 million off from getting to $100 million worldwide. I'm sure it doesn't really matter, though, because, the merchandise sales and DVD stuff and other re-releases, blah blah blah, everything that has come since the release of this film, I think they've already made way more than whatever they've made in the theaters. That was pretty cool to see, though, that this genuinely pretty good movie had a solid re-release and people went out to see. Obviously it wasn't like number 1 at the box office, oh my god, biggest movie of the weekend, blah blah, but the fact that it's in the top 5 is pretty special, Let's move on to number 6, which is Saw X, or Socks, making $3 million, adding to a domestic total of $47 million. It's still plowing away at some of these other Saw films. It is $2 million over Saw 3D or Saw the Final Chapter. It is $8 million away from outgrossing Saw 1, and worldwide it is sitting at $74 million, so that's $5 million over Saw 6. And $29 million away now from Saw 1. So it now needs to outgross the first Saw film domestically and worldwide. I think it has a stronger chance domestically right now, but they could make some more money worldwide and bump it up. But this is just cool to see. It's like you're seeing a franchise kind of revive itself. And even though it's not really a franchise that I'm big on, it's just kind of cool to see them just kind of like do whatever they want, or seemingly just start to prep like, okay, we tried to like win people over with like Jigsaw or Spiral. Now we can, let's just go back to doing, what it is we do great, with Tobin Bell and all this, all the things that the fans want, which is pretty good in this case, Let's move on to number 7, which is The Creator, making $2 million, adding to a domestic total of $36 million. I hate to keep comparing it to Gareth Edwards' other 2 films, but it's just kind of, sadly funny. It needs $164 million until it outgrosses Godzilla's domestic run. Worldwide, hey, it's sitting at $90 million, so it's $10 million over the initial production budget of $80 million, but it still needs about $70 million until they can actually double it, and also needs $439 million until it outgrosses Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. Oh, just a shame. I know the discourse surrounding this must be exhausting to some people, and some people are like, yeah, we need original movies, but not like this. Some people did really like this one, though. I thought it was pretty good. Maybe it's just best to just move on because I've already exhausted enough energy talking about some of this stuff in the past couple weeks, so no need repeating it. Let's move on to number 8, which is A Haunting in Venice, making $1.1 million, adding to a domestic total of $40 million, so it is $5 million off from Death on the Nile. Just, next weekend, we're so close to Halloween, I hope that there's just a slight little bit of a boom for this movie to just at least outgross Death on the Nile. That's all I'm asking. Worldwide it is sitting at $112 million now, so they are $8 million away from doubling, just barely getting over the finish line of doubling that $60 million budget, which is very exciting. And it needs $18 million until it outgrosses Death on the Nile. So both possibilities, depending on if it holds solidly enough of it outgrossing Death on the Nile domestically worldwide and also doubling its $60 million budget, that's all I need. That's all I need in life. At number 9, still hanging on for dear life, The Blind, the Duck Dynasty guys movie, dropping down from right around 5 and 6 to just 9. It's probably not going to be here next weekend, but it made $1.01 million this weekend, which adds to a domestic total of $15 million. I still can't find a budget for this thing, but hey, let's say it had a budget of like $3 million. They have 5 times that budget by getting to $15 million domestically. I don't know if that is the budget, but I'm just saying, if it was, then maybe they're in a good spot here. If it was $4 million, they have at the very least almost quadrupled it. So, or if it was a $5 million budget, they tripled it. You know what I mean? If it's anything higher, then they may be in trouble. Let's assume not. And closing out the video, number 10, The Nun 2. Bummer it couldn't stick around till, actual Halloween. But then again, it could get a boost, so who am I to judge right now? It made $887,000, adding to a domestic total of $85 million. So that's $1 million over the first Annabelle, $17 million till Creation, and The Conjuring 2 domestically. Worldwide, it is sitting at $262 million, which is $43 million off from Annabelle Creation. So there you go. The Nun 2. Maybe it'll bounce back next weekend, or maybe this is it. I mean, I usually feel like if you dip into the 100,000s, very rarely you'll be able to climb back up into a million area, but, it had a hell of a run, and it was at least a little better than the first Nun. Emphasis on a little. Now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's top 5. Number 1, gotta go with Blumhouse's Five Nights at Freddy's. Even though it is coming on Peacock on the same day, I think it'll do similarly to what the other two Halloween movies did, where the opening weekend will be really big, especially for something like this, but then it'll probably drop off because people realize, oh, it's at home, or I can pirate it because someone screen grabbed it off of Peacock or whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? Because that's what happens. At number 2, I'm gonna make a prediction for a movie that you probably have not heard of, and I didn't know about until like a couple hours ago, and usually movies that I don't know existed, I forget mentioning, but every once in a while I'll check Fandango and see like what's playing, at the weekend, see if that'll factor in. Sometimes I miss it, that's on me. But I saw a movie that is being released by Angel Studios, who recently did Sound of Freedom, and I checked because Fandango has that see the map, look who has already selected seat, and quite a few of them already, similarly to Sound of Freedom, already have a couple seats max reserved for this movie that I genuinely have not seen promoted anywhere. So just in case we have another Sound of Freedom on our hands, I think I have to go with After Death for number 2 over number 3, which is, I'm going to predict Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour. Only because if it is as big of a thing as Sound of Freedom kind of was back in July, I think it could potentially eclipse the Taylor Swift concert movie just because of how it's held over with the 66% drop. It probably won't drop off huge, but it'll still have enough, I think, where if it, like I said, if it does have the same success that Sound of Freedom did, it will be able to slip above. And then number 4, I think, will be Killers of the Flower Moon, and then number 5, The Exorcist Believer. But what are your predictions for next week's top 5? Leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.